But okay. But
Yeah.
how does that connect to neural training? I mean, it seems like you were about to say that.
No, I was just like I told you before, I'm not very familiar with the type of work that you do, and I'm kind of curious in seeing of how that stuff works and how it operates, because I know that a lot of the times when you're dealing with these things, it's very complex, and you need to sometimes have the right guidance and being able to understand it. That's what I was getting at.
So where are you coming from? That is to say, what do you feel you do know and can leverage off of, or if not you, other people, who you want me to
So
talk to?
I can talk from an artist's point of perspective, if that makes any sense. Meaning that as somebody that is an artist and as somebody that has spoken to many artists with this podcast and also in person, you, for me, I tend to see a pattern. A lot of the times you run into either very traumatized individuals that find art as a form of therapy and a way of being able to connect with others. I found people that have actually been able to create their own families, like within the artist community with other artists and being able to collaborate. Um, because of whatever kind of hardships or things that they've dealt with. That I find it interesting because I don't want to like put everybody into one group, but it seems to be this pattern that exists particularly in my personal experience when it comes to artists. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Um, well, there are lots of ways to go at this. I just want to mention that I was just writing about creativity. I wasn't about to talk about neural training, but I was saying, and I'll say again here, that a lot of us, well, so creativity is something out of the normal. That's how it's seen, and
Yeah.
it's often perceived that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that it usually has to have some normality to be in a context with. So if you're a creative painter, the context is painting. If you're a creative musician, the context is music. And some people push that, right? Because, there's been like abstract painting for which painters who were classically trained didn't understand. And there was like punk rock where anybody who could play music didn't understand. And they were trying to be creative outside the bounds of what people understood. But normally, when we're creative in the context that other people can understand. Otherwise, we're called crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't know what to make of us. So normally, when we creative, it's either for two purposes: either to express ourselves to other people or to enlighten ourselves. And so we know that there's got to be some pivot, some hinge point, some sanity if we're going to relate to other people, and usually even if we're going to relate to ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it depends on how good a communicator you are. So if you're a really good musician, you can be creative and people will appreciate you. But if you're a shitty musician, then being creative may be seen as just poor form or bad music,
Yeah.
and you won't be appreciated. So it takes a certain skill of communicating.
It does. I what What's interesting though is even when you deal with those musicians, like you said, you do. I've seen this. There tends to be those musicians that can create incredible music, be able to perform. I mean, like perform as if like they're professionals and really capture that audience. Like you can feel the emotions within the room. But yet, once they put that instrument down and you sit down and have a conversation with them, they can either be people that are extremely shy, they don't know how to properly communicate with other people, or they tend to kind of be more of a loner. They kind of stay in their own they stay in their own lane, they kind of create in their own space. So there is that kind of almost opposite parallel where if they have the instrument and the stage, they can be almost like an extrovert. but the second
Hmm.
they come off the stage, they automatically shell back into being an introvert. Does that make sense?
Maybe. Let me take it into a different direction. Not
Okay.
entirely. What I wanted to say is that we learn to self censor not just what we say, but what we think. And we do that because we realize that when you start to think a thought, it tends to squeak out your mouth. And if not out your mouth, then out some other medium, like your body language or your attitude or your eyes. So that we self censor what we think. So if you're being creative personally in the privacy of your own studio, you can do all kinds of stuff. And you don't care because no one's listening. And you don't misunderstand yourself because you know what you're trying to do, or you're looking for something. Um, but still, we self-censor ourselves. It becomes a habit. So some people are. I mean, this is sort of getting to the idea that there are people who are introverts. I think the introvert is somebody who's very cautious about what they say and think.
Okay.
And an extrovert is kind of exuberant and carefree. And the extrovert is probably somebody who's better at communicating because they don't feel it so much of a risk. Now, I mean, I'm talking about talking. I'm not, musically, music depends on some skill. So
Yeah.
really skilled people they just have more latitude,
Hmm.
you know. So what I was thinking of is that if you want to be creative, you have to stop self-censoring your thoughts. I mean, this is not a new piece of advice. It's like
No.
um, be exuberant, but of course you have to be careful because if your audience doesn't appreciate you, and that could be a professional audience or a social audience or your family audience, like if you get angry, you might be justified, but be completely ineffective either in any of those contexts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. We're not allowed to be angry socially. That's like considered, unless you're Adolf Hitler,
Taboo. Yeah.
in which case you can really. I mean, that guy was a master of social hypnotism. But you're supposed to temper your anger and your vitriol, and you're supposed to be inviting and comforting to most people, musically, socially, verbally. But if you're a person who's stressed and strained and traumatized by something, um, it gets very hard to express yourself fully.
Yeah.
So, they
But
say, like, if you listen to Beethoven, it was like really smashing on the piano. And I guess that was a lot of aggression, but it was presented in a way that was musically appreciated, at least
yeah,
eventually it was.
100%. I I think also though to point out in regards to trauma, I can speak for myself where even though I've had to deal with different forms of trauma, whether it be from childhood or just experiences throughout my life, I've used that as a tool for my art. So that when I do create, I use that as a way of being able to either be able to make my lyrics when I'm writing music or to be able to figure out different ways of what I want to draw. And I be honest, like I learned this from a therapist because the therapist told me you can either hold on to it and allow that to bottle feed you and just keep on bloating until it's no longer sustainable, or you can actually use it as a very beneficial tool. For me, it has worked. The thing is, you can't always take what works for you for others because I feel every single person works differently. But I find that interesting on how you can take something like that and make something creative out of it.
Well, that's very general. Some people can, some people can't. Depends on
Right.
the context. Um, and it kind of depends on your frequency. Uh, so I know one jazz musician well who was very I don't know, it seemed like he heard the world differently than other people heard it. And I remember I said to him at one point, Roswell, I'm trying to speak to you, Roswell. Can you hear me? And he said to me, "Oh, people are always trying to speak to me. I never hear any of them," kind of thing. It's like he was always a different plane. And I do know he had a certain amount of aggression and anger, but he never fed it to his audience. What he fed his audience was a kind of digested version of it, musically digested. And he was very had a very light touch, even though emotionally he might have been a different person. So he was unusual, and in therapy, when I deal with people, I'm mostly trying to just get them out of their shell, just to let them shed their skin and see who's in there. Because as a therapist, I don't have to be judgmental. I mean, to a point. I mean, I'll put up with a lot of rancor and anger and bullshit. Eh, eh, But the happily I charge for my time, so I can always say, "Is it
True.
worth what you're doing right now?" Or are you just venting? You should go outside and take a walk if you want to just scream at the world. Don't scream at me because it costs you money. So, I have that as a kind of ace up my sleeve.
Yeah.
You're charging me, so you can't abuse me as much as you might other people who are giving their time for free.
Yeah.
And that's important. And
It
I
is.
use that card a lot, to say, let's get back on track here. Because people love to just talk and meander around, and it's important, but not everything's equally important. So trying to focus. And I have the idea that somewhere where you were going is like, what is the important part to get out? Because it's not enough to just express yourself.
Right.
You have to use some discretion about, you know, are you just going to sort of like fingerprint with shit, or are you going to try to create something that has a melody?
Yeah.
Both have interesting options, but the audience isn't going to appreciate one as opposed to the other. So, which are you going to do? And um, do you have a goal? Do you have a need? Do you have an opportunity? Uh, you can ask those questions to some people and get answers and direction, but then other people need to just freak out sometimes. I mean, I guess everybody needs to freak out sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
or at least it's a good thing, because
Yeah.
otherwise, like you say, you end up bottled up, and it's like a pressure cooker. Eventually, it's going to get out.
Yeah.
So making, I don't want to say friends, but making paths, opportunities, uh, and we have to take a shit 1 or 2 times a day, whether we like it or not. Whether it's
Part of the
socially
human cycle.
appropriate, it's
Yeah.
part of the right. So there's stuff that needs to be discarded at an appropriate place and time, which
Yeah.
you have to distinguish from your music. Oh, it's interesting. I was just looking at an old movie called Stranger Than Paradise, which uses Screaming Jay Hawkins. I put a spell on you, or whatever it was, and it's such a wonderful piece because he shouts and screams in that music, but he does it in a way that's so appropriate. I mean, this is sort of like the birth of rock and roll, but
Yeah.
um,
I really love that example. Like I don't know if you're familiar. There was a soul band called Hot Chocolate in the 1970s, and their lead singer made a song called Emma, which was it, short synopsis would be a story about a brother and sister. They grew up. The sister wanted to be famous. Brother tried helping her, but she just couldn't handle the world, and eventually she committed suicide. But in the way he sings the song, you can almost feel the pain because there's a point where he starts screaming Emma on like the top of his lungs. So you're like almost getting engulfed with that feeling like, oh my God, like what happened?
yeah,
Um, it's not immediate gratification. That is, I feel, very in depth within tune of like, you're not just making a story, you're not just making lyrics. This is a story. It's a really deep story that you're portraying.
Well, so what do you want to make of that? Do you, uh, because you're emphasizing that there was a communication, that you could get it as a listener,
Hmm.
but I think that's really depends on a lot of skill and timing and subtlety,
Yeah,
because
it
you could have
does.
told that story and it would have fallen flat, or if it was out of tune or off key, it would
Hmm.
have been, you would have not gone there. So I mean, I'm coming back to the idea of discernment, discretion, but I don't want to get away from the idea of this thing of self-censorship, creativity. I mean, there's got to be an element of courage here. You've got to
Yeah.
be willing. I mean, so the guy who sang Emma, it wasn't his first try. He probably worked at it for a while, and maybe
Hmm.
longer than most people work on most things, because it was deep and powerful and poignant and not and indirect. And so you do get great musicians who seem to just have this. I keep thinking of Keith Jarrett, who
Yeah. Oh,
you
that's
could
a great
never figure
example.
out how he could do that.
Yeah.
How he could just seem to disappear and still produce music at the same time for hours on end. I don't like he had something in his brain that was unusual, but yeah,
Like a
there are other
chameleon.
people like that. I don't,
Crazy.
you wonder. I mean, I play keyboard sometimes too, and I wonder, God, the only way you could play like Keith Jarrett was to be unconscious. You couldn't. It'd be like trying to ride a bicycle while you're thinking about everything going on. It has to be in your body. Anyway, what I'm saying is, you have to give yourself the opportunity to express yourself that way, and uh, that get back to courage. It's don't expect to succeed. In fact, most good ideas don't come out right the first time, and you're lucky if they ever come out right. But the people who make them come out right usually are both courageous and diligent, and well, they're skilled as well. A lot of things. It
It's
doesn't
very
happen immediately.
no, and it's very like you said. A lot of the a great analogy would be like the story of the Wizard of Oz, where you have the wizard is behind the green curtain, and in reality, it's just a master playing with a machine. You know, it's basically a very complex structure that's happening where it's a lot of sometimes a lot of years, a lot of work, a lot of trial and error, a lot of failure to get to those points and to be able to make those things. But we me personally, I will say this, I don't always see that. Sometimes I forget that you don't just start from the bottom and then immediately go to the top. There's a lot of layers in between those to get there.
And as a therapist, those layers often are painful.
Yeah.
But I say that with some caution, because the people who come to me are in some distress, and maybe there are people who don't have distress and they pass through those layers more successfully and they don't come to me. But it's sort of my both my own personal. Of course, I have to relate to people, so I,
Yeah.
I tend to be the kind of person who understands progress through distress, which I'm not sure that's entirely healthy, but these are the people that come to me, and these are the people I help, and I question it in myself too. Like, am I putting too much stress on myself? And that's a real problem, because as a therapist, you do get sucked into your client's worldview, and part of what I'm paid for is not to get sucked into their worldview. So, but I
It's
can't
hard
not be
though.
there. I have to be
Yeah.
there. I have to be, what's the word? Resilient. I have to be able to go there and come back. It's like it's like the Charon is the character who led people across the river Styx as they were dying to go to the land of the underworld. And you've got to be able to take people across the chasm without getting lost yourself. It's
Hmm.
so my role is kind of the role of a guide. I'm definitely not a teacher, because I'm not going to tell you what you need, because what you need is probably what you don't know, and I don't know it either. And I'm a I'll help facilitate your enlightenment, but I'm not, the Messiah in any shape or form.
No.
And I don't want to be. My role is to become obsolete as quickly as possible,
You know,
unnecessary.
it's interesting because I was thinking about this, and a lot of the times, like when you're a therapist and you sit down with a client, you're hearing their view and their take on their scenario, and based on that, you have to be able to like maybe I'm wrong, but being able to figure out the other side of what could possibly be happening, and
Oh, yeah.
like you said, like it, you think like, oh, you shouldn't get sucked in, but hello, you're putting a lot of work into something that you're not supposed to get sucked into. Count sounds a little
Absolutely.
counterproductive. Yeah.
When I listen to them, I have to empathize and understand, and very importantly, I have to disbelieve. So I know your story is bullshit. And in a sense, you do too, because otherwise you wouldn't be coming to me for another story. But you are going to hang on to certain things, probably the wrong things, because they're what's important to you and what you build your personality on. And my role is to sort of, you know, leverage you out of the things to which you're attached so that you can see the possibility of something else. I mean, a good example is heartbreak. How do you help somebody who's brokenhearted? What do? You tell them, oh, your partner was just a fucking asshole. That's not going to help.
No.
No.
Makes things worse actually.
Yeah, it's like, it's a very dicey situation. That grief is similar, but a little different because nobody's at fault.
No.
Um, but it's still something you've got to let go of. And okay, so there's grief, there's heartbreak, um,
Hardship.
there's trouble, trauma. I mean, all these things involve an attachment to something that's heartbreaking or grief filled, and I have to understand it, but see beyond it, and so do you. So, or talk about death. Death is great. I mean, your own death, your own mortality. That's a tough one. And most people don't think about it because
No.
what are you going to do about it?
No, and
But it'll come.
it
Time
and
will come.
it does, and it's crazy. Like I have dealt with my dad passed away 5 years ago, and a lot of the times you don't think about death. And one thing I've realized since dealing with that grief, I think about it all the time.
Yeah. Well, I like to tell people I have a much better relationship to my parents now that they're dead than they ever did in their lifetime. Because now I don't have to listen to their bullshit, and now I can imagine the higher level that they could never get to. I don't have to fight them because they never were going to go there anyhow. For what reasons I never fully understood, but maybe I will someday. Um,
Yeah.
so, but get back, well, to creativity. I think this is all part of the same package. How do you allow your mind to go places which aren't entirely known, maybe not entirely safe, and generally socially unrewarded or unacceptable? I mean, music is great because how do you get a new idea? By doodling with things that don't seem to fit. Do they sound good? No, not at first. You have to find something in the chaos. And that's very much like therapy. You have to find something in the chaos, which means you have to let the chaos, or at least dip your toe into the chaos. And that's where courage comes in, because chaos is dark and it doesn't feel good and it feels threatening depending on how secure you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be easier to engage in chaos, failure, trauma, than all the other bad stuff if you've got somebody supportive. Or supportive, that's another difficult word, because I don't try to be supportive, because supportive of what? That's easy to manipulate. Supportive
Could
of
become a
my,
handicap or even a crutch.
I don't want to
Yeah.
be that.
Right.
So, and I don't want to tell you you're a nice guy, I'm your friend, and everything you think is fine, because that's not going to help anything.
No.
But then, to be reasonable, everyone's got their limits. And if I were to tell you you're completely full of shit, you're a worthless sack of garbage, and nothing you think is of any value, all that wouldn't help either. So there's got to be a mix. I've got to be sort of encouraging, but I've got to say, well, here's another idea, or maybe you're looking at it in an unproductive way. That's an easy reframe. So somebody bothers you, and I say, well, maybe you don't understand that other person. That I've got clients who always get in fights with people, and I say, well, maybe you, instead of feeling that other person as a threat to you, maybe you should ask them what their problem is, or how can you help them. Asking someone what their problem is kind of aggression, because you're saying they've got a problem,
And they don't want
and
to
they don't want to
admit
hear
that they
that.
have a problem. Yeah.
No, I think you're the problem.
Right.
So you have to say, how can I help you? To diffuse. So like that's a reframe, and you'd think that might be obvious, but in the heat of the moment, it's not so obvious.
No.
Especially if you're like dealing with somebody who's really
And
you feel has betrayed you.
Your emotions are so heightened in those scenarios. Like you're in survival mode. You're 100% in survival mode. You are ready to attack like a panther
Or flee.
or a flea.
Have not like slam the door and disappear, which is another thing.
I mean, that could also lead to sometimes extreme violence, and sometimes.
But here, yes, but anger is okay, violence is not.
Right.
I mean, you have to be able to express yourself and contain the situation to allow for progress. If you
Like a
accelerate
balance.
it, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
like they say, you should never bring a knife to a gunfight.
Yeah.
If you're
Okay.
there's be reasonable about this.
Yeah, it's true. God, that idiot that brings a knife to a gun shoot. Damn, man.
Well, that's what happens when people accelerate the aggression. Nobody's really paying attention to what the other person's capable of doing.
No.
And before you know, that's when you get violent. And I got violent once too. I hit my wife. I slapped my wife. The only thing I ever did because she was like hysterical. And it actually worked. But that's different. That's not a knife or a gun. And I think it was I'm ashamed that I did it. But on the other hand, I don't know what else I would have done except shut down. Anyway, it worked. So I mean, it's possible, but I wouldn't advise it. Anger is hard enough to deal with. Violence is very much. I mean, you get people who like to fight, right? I mean, there's Fight Club, is a great movie, right? All about physicalizing
fighting
the trauma.
Yeah.
But of course, I don't want to ruin the movie, but it has a very strange twist at the end, which undoes the whole premise.
No, but it's interesting. I have friends that are veterans, and some of them have found like being able to go into the gym and doing boxing or jujitsu or martial arts or something like that gives them an outlet to get out that anger and that aggression that they feel. Because I mean, I remember him telling me, he's like, imagine me coming from like chaos and just everything is moving in every direction to now I'm in normal life. What am I supposed to do? That switch is sometimes really hard for people to get used to. You can't just, like, we say that animals are territorial, human beings are territorial too. Once you get used to, I feel like you get used to one territory, it's really hard to get used to another territory. Like, it takes time.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to therapy. I mean, take that back, reel that in to the audience's reality.
Okay.
I want to say that anger, energy, even violence can be transmuted creatively. And if you do have those things, it's important to transmute them. And it would be great if you can. So, instead of cutting your ear off, find something positive. And we could talk about metaphor, altered states,
Hmm.
um, improve your. I mean, I think this is very important in terms of trauma. You have to surround yourself as much as possible by positive energy.
Yeah,
If you
very much
recognize
so.
that you're in a
Yeah,
negative or toxic environment, you're going to have a very hard time recovering as long as you're still in that environment.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
one way or another, stop the violence.
Hmm. I I have found that along the way I've lost a lot of people. I've had friends that I've known for several years, and just like that, it became toxic, and I ended it. And when I think back, I'm not upset or angry. I kind of am happy because I got myself out of situations that if I would have continued, would have just added more negativity to my life that I didn't need. It's not about like eliminating everybody out of your life, but I feel sometimes there are people that like that's it. I can't. Like you're becoming too much and this is interfering with my life. And I don't feel that's selfish. I feel like you
Well,
have every right to feel that way.
maybe you can think of it like a spice. There's a certain amount of spice that's appropriate, and too much just ruins the dish.
Yeah.
It's not that the spice is bad, it's just that it's not appropriate anymore for you. So maybe
No.
the person that was bothering you needs to go off and bother someone else. And that's what they need to do until they get the right kind of pushback or, breakthrough. But for you, it may be enough is enough. Um, I need to, you know, I need to level up here, or I need to, take the off ramp. And it's not a personal thing. I feel much the same way. I regret so many what I thought were committed friends or committed situations
Yeah.
that just drifted away. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, what a waste. Like all my old girlfriends, but you see, this is me again. I have a streak of commitment to people, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking, well, what did they think they're going to start over again? You never start over again. You always carry on with what you've got and move it forward. I rem- I have a number of clients who, are going through relationship difficulties, and they break up, and I say, "Oh, now that you've broken up, now you are really permanently attached, because now
Mm-hmm.
you'll never forget your relationship." And it's too bad because there are no burned bridges. Well, I mean, there's scorched bridges, but they're always there. You can't. I mean, unless you get like electroconvulsive therapy, you're not going to forget the most important episodes of your life.
Yeah.
And why should you? I
They
mean,
had
so
they
you
had
can do it over
value at the
again?
time. Yeah. Very much so.
So I try to get people in that mind frame too. It's like nothing is worthless, especially the more intense it is, most likely the more worth you can get out of it. And if it's going to be bad and you're going to need to eliminate it from your life, well, try not to. You know, try not to be the one who is guilty of shutting it down. Try to make as many overtures and positive invitations and take as much blame or whatever it takes to keep the channel open, because other people's stress and grief and heartbreak are the you know basically avenues to their enlightenment. As contradictory as that may seem, but that's when you push through the whole logjam of trauma. If you can push through that logjam of trauma, there is greener grass on the other side of that fence.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to abandon people,
Mm-mm.
even if they're toxic. If you can like stomach it as much as possible to see the good of people. Of course, there are people who maybe are just injurious, and those people you should just get away from.
Yeah.
Um, but you have to take as much responsibility as you can, because otherwise you've got this magnetic attraction to a negative person that you haven't recognized, then they'll eventually enter your orbit again.
I I have a friend of mine that we've been friends for about 8 years, and she's a single mom of three, and she had a very toxic relationship with her ex, and it's kind of affected her kids. in those 8 years, we've taken breaks and we've kind of rekindled over time. We've had different ways of how we communicated. Either it was just only text or it was over the phone. At the very beginning, we used to meet in person, and then it became long distance. The thing for me was, like you said, even when there was those ups and downs and those issues, I myself found that even within this negativity, this person meant something to me. So I try as much as I can to give to her and as much as I can to give to her kids. And I don't regret that. I feel that it's something that we kind of look past, because you're right. Sometimes you're like, oh, this person's too toxic or they're this, but they are worth saving. There are those people that are worth saving and keeping in your life. You have to look past that and see the other positive things that they give you.
Yeah, well, it's I'm the personification of ambivalence. So every time you tell me one thing, I'll think of the other.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, are you really? I mean, it's easy to say I'm helping. It's easy to be the hero, the savior.
I'm not helping.
You have to also think, are you respecting yourself enough? Are you stuck in the helper mode? Um, keep thinking
Yeah.
of that's Stephen King is a great author for
Oh,
the horror of normal life.
favorite is Pet Cemetery.
Is it? I was thinking of that Kathy Bates movie where the author is.
Oh, I know
I
what you're
could,
talking about. It's like one word.
yeah, right. You're right. And it's a movie I couldn't watch because I just couldn't watch it.
It's hard. It's hard to swallow. It really is.
That's just like pure Stephen King to me. It's just horror, the horror of normal people. Um, anyway, why should I mention that? The point is that you can you can turn from being a helper to being a harmer very easily because your addiction to being the helper can feed the other person's addiction to being the victim.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you do want to help and you don't want to give up, but there are some people, I fear, who need to be dropped
Yeah.
from a high place where they'll break like Humpty Dumpty into better pieces
Like a
of their own
100-story
accord.
building. There's plenty of them in Manhattan. But yeah.
I, are you in Manhattan?
No, I'm in South Florida.
Oh, another Floridian, another cracker.
I'm not from Florida originally. I'm originally from New York.
Yeah, well, me too, actually. So,
Nice.
yeah, that's
City or upstate?
just outside the city. I used to go into the city a lot.
I grew
I
up
still
in
like the city.
Rockland County.
I grew up in Westchester, but
Okay. Yeah. All right. Neighbors across the pond, literally.
yeah. I lived in the Hudson Valley for 20 or 30 years. But I mean, culture is very interesting. We could talk about that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think I will mention this, and I think it's important that you have to recognize your lineage because if you're Italian or if you're Swiss or if you're Japanese, Chinese, indigenous, there's a lot in you that you didn't ask for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just in your culture, it's in your genes
Mm-hmm.
and your attitudes and all kinds of things. And it's not obvious. What is obvious is probably not the most important stuff. Oh, race is another one, of course, race and religion. Um,
Wonderful.
I think you
I
have to
know.
understand that stuff. I have to try to understand it, at least.
Yeah, you touched on something that's important because, like, I'm African. My father was born in Morocco and he immigrated to this country in 1970. And my mom is third generation American, from European background. So, like, I have the weirdest genes, and you tend to, you're right, you tend to forget that, like, your makeup sometimes has a lot to do with how you developed and how you, I guess, relate with other human beings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's like looking through a frozen lake at the what's underneath. There's all kinds of stuff underneath. It's dark underneath. Dark not in the bad sense, but in the obscure sense. It's obscure. So yeah, I agree with you, but it goes on and on and on,
Yeah.
tunnels all the way down.
What I wanted to touch on, like, regarding that in that relationship, the thing that I realized, and I'm quite young, and I think it's kind of a thing that you have to be able to learn and develop as time goes on, is creating boundaries within relationships. Is that we're It doesn't mean that you're telling a person no, you're telling the person your limitations. And if there's that agreement, you know that you can have proper communication with this person, because I feel then you have that two-way direction that exists within that relationship.
Yes. And
And I feel that when we were talking about, for example, like heartbreak and kind of people breaking apart, it could be for a lot of different reasons. I've realized that over time, sometimes it's where you need a break. I've had relationships, like I've said before, where I've had breaks for like a year or maybe 2 years until we kind of rekindle things and kind of reconnected. And I have found that those relationships, this second round, is stronger than it was the first.
yeah. Um, okay, that's very nice and and nice if you can get it. Um, but it's not clear what strong means entirely. I have two ex-marriages, and I'm in contact with both of them, both of my exes. And you could say that the relationships are stronger, but only to the extent um, that I was deluded in the first place. So there's certainly, I didn't leave either of those relationships. I felt they left me. I mean, there's no doubt they did. And so to say that the relationships are stronger is kind of existential, stronger in the sense that they're doing what they need to do,
But they're
but
different.
they're denying me what I had expected, which was, I guess, wrong. So, is that a question of coming to realization that I mean, I do think, in fact, and this is kind of a little out there. I don't expect people to really understand, but I do think that both of those two exes were people that I pathologically was attracted to pathologically for a need, for personal need. I'm still not going to reject that. I still think that pathology was called love,
Mm-hmm.
but love can. I'm going to go to my grave believing in my version of love, which may be pathological and overly attached, and I don't think so. But of course, I don't think so. Um, and I may never find the person who agrees with me,
But,
but I'm sort of stuck on that. And
I don't. I'm kind of in the belief that you don't necessarily need people to agree with you with everything. There are things that are personal to yourself that regards to your own personal life. Like you said, it revolves around you either between a relationship with somebody. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to be involved in that situation. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure you should try to make sense. I think that might be a, a crutch. I don't think it has to make sense. I think it might work, but the two parties are going to have a different sense of what making sense means. So you
Yeah.
have to be big enough to allow different kinds of make sense. So I had an uncle who got divorced when I was very young, and they had two families that after each partner got remarried, and they would all get together. And I thought that was such an inspiring family where people could then split up and then reform as two separate families, and everybody seemed to be, you know, in allegiance with each other. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if it was true because it was only what I saw from the outside, and they were cousins, so I was only remotely connected to them. But you know, there was an example where I guess you could agree to disagree and reform a relationship on a new agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think personally, I'm too intense for that, or I get involved with people who are not lenient enough. I don't know which. Um, I can't use my personal experience too much generally. I use it personally with the people who are my clients, and I find or draw from examples in my own life co- correspondences with theirs, my
Mm-hmm.
clients, and that works. Um, but I think it makes me somewhat unusual because I have no tolerance and no interest in generalizing it to everyone. I would not be a good actor appealing to a general sense of um, a theme.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, actors are famous for not kind of knowing who they are anyhow, because that's kind
Right.
of their profession. But
Yeah.
my
Sure.
business is knowing who I am, even at the expense of over extending myself to people.
Right.
So I have no social life because I can't put up with trivial stuff. I want to go right to the heart of the matter with everyone right away, which
Mm-hmm.
is fine if they're paying you $200 because they'll say, "Great, that's where I wanted to go in the first place." But in
Right.
most people, they don't want to go there. They're not, you know. So I'm happy
Yeah.
not wasting my time, but I'm sad that I don't have anything but paying clients as a social life. And you,
Uh.
I have podcast people who I talk to, you know, and I appreciate very much these conversations.
Yeah. I it's for me it allows me to see different perspectives and different things. I like to have open conversations, and the reason being is I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish community. I left around like 2017, and I kind of entered a new world. And what that means for me is that I've had to kind of learn and adapt to survive to an environment I was never raised in. And I think I'm managing and I'm doing perfectly fine. But one of the things that have helped me along the way personally has been being able to see different perspectives.
That's good. I mean, sounds good to me. But, it's weird because you came from a Jewish background. I
Mm-hmm.
came from a Jewish background. I didn't think it was, but it's like it was one of those secular Jewish backgrounds. Like, it never had anything to do with religion, but it percolated into the family and the sexual gender stereotypes
Uh
and
huh.
work habits and self-image or lack of self-confidence,
Mm-hmm.
and various other things, the artistry and the emphasis on knowing. So it's there, and um, yeah, like one of my exes came from a Calvinist Michigan background, which is very different. I This is one of my ignorances of my youth. I didn't feel that there was that much difference between people, and that we could work it all out in any situation, science, relationship, social. And I realized no, it that, that there's just too much momentum behind a person's personality, and too little desire to drop who they are for all relationships to work out in the best of possible ways. It would be different if you were just two people on a desert island. Then I think you'd get along. But too many people let burned bridges, go by, water under the bridge, and off to another situation. So what I'm saying is, I no longer believe that lineage is so, as irrelevant as I used to think. And so now when I look at my relationship to the Calvinist Michigan person, I see vast differences. which I thought were just going to be background history, but they aren't. Like they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and that's kind of like my new my new sort of go-to um, attitude is that the people I get involved with, clients aside, I want to know more about them. I want to know about their history. I want to know about their family. And it's interesting in other cultures, they would have these arranged marriages, and we kind of poo-poo that and think how awful that is. But I can see the wisdom in getting to know the family of the person you're getting involved with. In fact, anyone I get involved with now, I want to know their parents because I want to know where they came from and what they're carrying. Um, you want to pause? All the best relationships are well grounded in history and lineage. I think there's a wisdom in respecting your elders and ancestors if possible,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't get respect automatically,
No.
but certain people deserve it. And it's also interesting, like, oh, I'm seeing this is bothering me now. I have a 26-year-old, 27-year-old son, and I have a 14-year-old son. And the 14-year-old son is now entering that phase in which 14-year-olds are supposed to be antagonistic to their parents. There's that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm watching his friends struggle with their parents. And I don't have any struggle with my 14-year-old, and I can't imagine struggling with him. So I'm watching these other parents and their aggression to their children and their children's aggression back to their parents. And I'm thinking, what a tragedy. Uh, they should get some counseling. They should talk to me. But of course, people only gain when they're ready. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of the tragedy of addiction and excessive habits is that you're often not ready to change until something really hits you that's, you know, traumatic or injurious.
Yeah.
And that's sad. So, I mean, here's my lesson to every listener is like, don't wait for, bridges to be burned. Don't wait for catastrophe and unrepairable damage. And don't think that counseling or guidance or coaching is just for sick and weak people, because it's actually not. It's usually the people who are ready to move forward that get advice and help. And I have to keep thinking of that myself too. I get my own issues, which I should get advice and help for.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to encourage people. I mean, in a very pragmatic sense, it's about a return on investment. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there are things that you never gain until you put out for,
Mm-hmm.
until you put yourself at risk.
I I I very much believe that failure is not a bad thing. I think failure in and itself is success. It allows you to push yourself forward and not make the same mistakes twice
Well, unless you made the same mistake twice, maybe
or
you don't
four
need to make it a
times.
third time.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's. I mean, my favorite quote seems to be Thomas Edison, who said, "I failed my way to success." And it's true. The bigger your idea, the more failure you can expect it to encounter. And you want big ideas because they take you to higher levels. So expect
Expected.
blowback
Yeah.
and what appears as failure. But I would say it's not failure in the sense that it's making clear what the dead ends are. And if you didn't know the dead ends, you'd head off down them. So the sooner, that's that we say in software, fail fast and fail early. So, you know, that's the way to get the most out of a bad situation with the least consequence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the least negative consequence. Um, so yeah, it's like But then are you expected like act like a person with Tourette's and just curse out everyone who bothers you? You know, maybe that's not a bad. Maybe not. Maybe I don't know. It
Works for
depends.
some people. Works for some people.
Right. I mean, shit. Or just don't do it to a cop if you're black, especially. You know?
Especially
But
if you live out here in South Florida. Yeah,
I mean, fuck. It's there's no general rule, but it does take effort and risk,
it does.
courage too.
Oh, 100%. I think also, when it comes to courage, I think what's kind of forgotten is it's something you have to earn. It doesn't just like, it's not like a badge, like a purple pin that you put on. Right?
Courage is not a purple pin that you put on. No.
No.
Um, I mean, it fits in the whole thing. A lot of the stuff that you need to do, you won't get rewarded for or recognized for. So you have to be strong enough. I mean, here's I think the next level, which is the weirdest level. You've got to find inner spiritual guidance in yourself. Call it self love, call it spirit, call it fortitude, or courage, or foolishness. But you've got to have some dedication to something that guides you in the right direction. And it's sort of a higher thing. That's partly, or maybe totally, what my job is as a therapist is to help people find that so that they can find their own guidance in their own correct direction and not rely on me because I'm never there at the right time. I'm always like a week late. So finding that, um, I mean, I'm just reading a book a friend wrote who's a spirit channel, and she does that by talking to her spirit guides who appear to her as voices from the, beyond. And she has conversations. She's got a whole 400-page book of conversations with her spirit guides. And I'm thinking, well, that's not how I work. But if that's the way you're going to get the direction, fine. Um, and this person in particular, she doesn't have that active a social life, so I guess she can have these private conversations without freaking everybody out because they're just between her and them.
You got a point there.
I mean, if you were on stage, it's very interesting. A performer has to perform to the audience. If you just get out there and get up on the stage and rave like a lunatic, your career probably won't go very far. So,
But I like I like that perspective of the deeper level of being something spiritual, where it can be something like you said, like either self love. I think also people being able to have like the self confidence, not that the shallow self confidence, like real self confidence, like you actually believe in yourself. Because like you said, like we've been talking about how stepping through those layers, that person being able to see, hey, I want to get here, but I got to get through all of this to get there. And like, I know what my end goal is. That's where I want to get. And I'm going to get through all of this.
yeah, and you keep stopping when I think you're about to make a point.
What I'm trying to get at is it's not something that is instant gratification. It's something that, like I said in regards to courage, is something that you have to work towards. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in 10 years. It could take 50 years. It could take towards the end of your life. Like, I don't think there is a time. What I'm trying to get is there isn't necessarily like a time limit or a time frame of when these things happen, when they don't happen.
Well, that's why death is useful because it says that there is an end point, and if you want it to happen in your life, then you do have to budget for it to some extent. So, how old are you? 30 maybe?
26.
So you've got 30 years before you start to look at the last third of your life, or something like that. So 30 active years where you have the energy to run around and make lots of mistakes and um, do various other things.
I'm looking
After
forward.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, but like after that, once you're 60, then you're gonna. It's not that you're gonna retire. It's that hopefully you'll be on the right track by then. You won't still be lost in the jungle, you know, or out on the street or something like that.
Yeah.
Because many things, opportunities will start to close down. Health, work, mobility, all kinds of stuff. So you want to like have found some calm waters by that time. So that's very helpful to know that you know I wrote a book. My first book was called The Learning Project. When I interviewed people of all different ages and asked them, what were they trying to learn and why and how did they expect to get there? And I divided my interviews, of which there were 35,
Oh wow.
among young people, middle-aged people, and old
Hmm.
people, or senior people. And that was the biggest difference. The young people, they didn't see any horizon. It was so far off. They were trying everything, go in any direction, had all kinds of things they wanted to do, and chaotic life, and they didn't have a very good rehearsed presentation. They go left and right and up and down, and it was great. I loved to talk to them. They're so full of energy. And then the middle-aged people, they were like trying to ratchet it down and hone it in and become well appreciated and defined, and hopefully have found a way forward. And they had a story, and they had values, and they were going to tell them to you. And then the old people, of course, I picked these to be interesting people, not just your average schmo, um, had inspiring stories that they had actually written down somewhere, and they had a whole sort of out the rear window view of life,
Hmm.
and they were accomplished, and they could be inspiring, but they didn't have the same kind of frenetic energy as the teenagers, obviously.
Yeah.
So I thought this was, I had expected maybe I'd get an answer to this question of how do you learn, but I really got three different answers, you know, and I don't even know what the answers were. They were three different points of view and many different answers. So I spoke to musicians and technical people and social people and all kinds of stuff. Um,
Very in depth.
yeah, my point was, wait, I'm trying to remember what was the last thing you said. What was the
I,
last thing you said?
I
Remember?
said very in depth. It's.
No, before that, before I started talking. Um,
I don't
oh well, we'll have to pick it up. It'll come back to the surface.
remember. But I find that really interesting because I think it may also show like what you're saying is that it's almost where you're at different viewpoints within the lifetime, from birth to death. And your mindset does eventually change as you age. And I mean, the idea of staying young, great. Stay young. But to your point, and I 100% agree, it's you're not going to get the same answers.
No. All right. Well, let me take this opportunity to answer
Yes.
your first question in, what's undoubtedly the short time we have left.
Hmm.
You first question was about neural tone, brain training, or
Hmm.
neurological training. And I do think that is an important question, and it plays a role in everybody's life. So I want to explain it a little bit.
Okay.
I talked about how your culture and your lineage and your attitudes and your genetics influences how you think and what you do, and
Hmm.
it does. But it maybe below that, there's a kind of level of neural tone, which we generally consider definitive of a personality. So there are the frantic people, and there are the tense people, and there are the laid back people, Maybe they're the creative people, and whatever you know you see,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not true. All of those things are learned to at least half a degree, half of what you see. So
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that you become habituated to that personality, and it's neural. So if you're an anxious person, you carry that in everything. You tend to be reactive, you tend to be suspicious, you tend to be defensive, you tend to be perhaps exuberant, but that's a neural state, and you can tone it down. Um, there are other people who may be depressed or depressive, and that's another neural state, a kind of feeling anxious or threatened or insecure or inadequate. And you can change that with neural training. It sounds like bullshit, but
But I, I'm I,
you'd have to understand it.
I'm hearing what you're saying, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense. It's almost where you can have more control of your mind, right?
But even below your mind, I
Okay.
want to emphasize it's below your, it's the foundation of your mind. It's what your
Okay.
mind sits on. So think of it like a structure built on land. Is the land swampy? Is it rocky?
Mm-hmm.
Is it level? So you
Mm-hmm.
can change, you can go in with a kind of the bulldozer of neural training and level the land. And you can make yourself a less anxious person. And if you do that, or make a less depressed person, less traumatized person, less reactive person, a more creative person, a more spontaneous, any of these things. If you do that, it changes subtly everything. But subtly is the point. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, you know, open the windows to sunshine where it was dark before. It just changes. Here's an example. I used to give this neural training called neurofeedback to anybody who would walk in the door. I would go to my friend's house who has people walking in their door all the time. She actually ran the New York City Village Halloween parade, a constant stream of people in and out. And I would give them all neural training. They had no idea what I was doing, and I had no idea who they were. And I remember one guy came back the next day and he said, "Well, it didn't do anything to me, not at all. But today everybody's been nice to me and been happy to see me and greeted me warmly, whereas they usually don't. And I was offered a job." And I'm thinking, yes, well, that's the difference. You don't know how it changes you, but other people sense it in your energy. It could be in how you look at them or how you carry yourself, whether you stand up straight or whether you look around or whether you breathe the air or deep breathe or not. And you
Or
don't
body
even know this stuff.
language.
Body language.
Yes.
It can change your body language. That's just an indication
Mm-hmm.
of what the neural base does. And of course, this may not affect what you decide to do, what you decide to, your choices between A and B or what to have for dinner. But other people start changing their orbit around you, and that affects a lot of stuff over time.
Mm-hmm.
Who will collaborate with you? Who will put up with you? Who is attracted to you? I mean, I'd like to be more attractive to more people, but it doesn't seem to work. But so what? I have faith in myself. You know, when you're 18 and you're horny, you can go out and do all kinds of stupid stuff to make yourself attractive, and then you'll learn in a few years what comes from that, which is probably not what you expected. But when you're older, and like I say, two marriages behind me, two wonderful kids, two ex partners who did not live up to my expectations. Uh, I don't want to do it again. You know, so I have. You have to have faith with who you are,
Mm-hmm.
whoever it is. And you accept yourself for who you are, even if it's not the person. I'm not famous. I'm not rich. Most people would like to be celebrated and secure. Those things are okay, but you have to realize that coming back to brain training, you can't build a skyscraper on a swamp. You have to build what's appropriate to your personality,
Mm-hmm.
and you try to increase your personality in positive ways. Be maybe more creative, more supportive,
Mm-hmm.
more courageous. Um, but it's very hard to predict where that will lead you.
Yeah, very much so. And you know what? The truth is that sometimes we're not perfect. And I think that this idea of perfection, exterior perfection, internal perfection, it's not real. We're imperfect beings. That is human beings in design.
Well, if it weren't us that was imperfect, our environment is imperfect. So it's not clear what it would be to be perfect. I mean, you could be the Dalai Lama, and it doesn't make the world a greater place,
No.
although you may be very positive influence. So, and I do think ultimately, and I'm not sure about this, but I feel it, that your value to others defines your value to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a positive influence, you can feel good about yourself. And like I say, I don't know what to make of it. So, can you feel good about being a bad person? Well, I guess you can, but I guess I don't support that. So, I think you have to be. So, what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to support other people around you? It keeps getting back to these dichotomies that you have to be courageous, you have to be faith in yourself, and you have to be creative, and you have to be willing to fail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is what, like, the role model I try to show my teenager. And when he has different attitudes, I say, I think your attitudes suck, but go ahead, do it. He
It,
wants to be Pentecostal, go for it. I think it's stupid, but okay. And he gives me the finger and says, "Oh, fuck off, Dad." And I say, "Okay, whatever." But I'll still, love you and do everything I can to support you,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think sometimes what gets lost in translation is if you come off offensive, and put a stance of where, no, you can't do this, and I'm gonna lock you in a box, in regards to, like, oh, I'm gonna restrict things from you. It doesn't necessarily always make a very healthy environment. From my own personal experience, it actually caused more harm than it did good. But
I
I've
always think it does. I think you have to be really super generous and support people in making their mistakes.
mm-hmm,
You can say you think it's a mistake, but if they depend on you, you still have to support them. So, parents these days seem to rail against their kids' 24-hour obsession with video games. I understand, but what's the choice? They're they're social beings, and these video games are social environments, and so I support my son in whatever he does, which is like 24-hour video game playing. And I know from other generations and other parents that other kids have done this too, and they turn out fine.
yeah, like Radioheads, for example, the disc jockeys. I mean, throughout time, there's always been this, and I think, again, like, you have to come with a generous amount of salt, because this idea of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. Can you really 100% put yourself in somebody else's shoes and really understand them? Maybe, but I don't really think to a full degree.
Well, Steve Martin has a joke that you should always walk a mile in someone else's shoes, because then you know how it feels and you've got their shoes.
Yeah.
But that's Steve
Oh,
Martin for you. But yeah, I mean, you never know how to use. I mean, yeah, there's so many undercurrents of what goes on. If you can't be entirely supportive of someone else, you're probably injecting your own need into the situation.
mm-hmm.
And
Powerful.
then you're doing something therapeutic for yourself. And then we're back to what you said, okay, fail once, okay, fail twice, oh, okay, maybe. Fail 3 times, if it's in the same way, the same failure, now maybe you should consider something else. So I have 2 failed marriages, and so I'm going to say, I'm not going to do the same again. Fail twice, it must be my fault. And am I going to live to see the right choice? Maybe, but maybe not. But at least I'm going to have some great kids. And I help my clients, and I write good books. So, they can write that on my tombstone.
You know what though? The work that you do, people don't understand like it's important because not everybody has the skills and abilities to do this. Not everybody has the patience and coordination to be able to sit down with clients day in and day out. You know, again, I don't think everybody's built this way, but people such as yourself that are able to do these things and be able to have this type of perspective, be able to open to these new ideas of where there is a different approach and it does work.
Yeah. Not everybody's open to hearing it either. So,
I know.
you know,
Hopefully, we raise
uh,
some awareness today.
well, like you said, when you looked at my website, it spans the spectrum from psychotherapy to coaching. And that's kind of, I think you have to be agile across that whole spectrum. If you think you're mentally ill, then my effort is to try to help you understand what your strengths are and how to not focus on your illness, but focus on your strengths. And if you come to me because you're really strong and you're annoyed by things, my effort is to draw your attention to your weaknesses and what you're overlooking and how you're undermining yourself. And maybe how you're crazy, or I'll say that, but craziness is really another degree of dysfunction than simply not coping with circumstances
Mm-hmm.
one on one. But I'll talk to people and say, you're just obsessed with success. I mean, this is often the problem with high performance people is they're obsessed with success, and anything less is unsatisfactory in themselves or anyone else. And that's almost a mental illness too. It'll get you in trouble. I mean, yeah. So these people get upset with things they shouldn't be upset about
Yeah.
because they're not important, and they get rewarded with things that aren't really rewarding, like money. So this is the hyper successful person is very much like an addicted person. So and we call addiction a mental illness, sort of. So what's the difference? So that's why my website and my attitude spans a wide spectrum. Because I don't think you can be just one. You can't just address your paranoia and think everything's fine now, unless you actually have a sense of purpose.
Yeah. Totally.
And I've had good people who insist that they're, virtuous, who I've had to show that they were not so virtuous.
Sometimes it's hard to see your ugly side.
I think it always is.
Yeah. Very much so. Um, I was gonna ask you regarding your website. I know that you have social media. You also run your own podcast. Is that correct?
I have occasionally interviewed people, and I'd like to do that more, but I'm cautious because I don't want to talk about things I'm not interested in.
Yeah, totally agree
But
with you.
yes, I've been doing a lot of podcasting. And I'm not actually sure what we're talking about here because I mean, I know what we've spoken about, and I'm hoping that the listeners are on this frequency, creative, artistic.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd love to hear from them. So tell them uh, that they can book a 15-minute free conversation with me and other things, and read my books and podcasts and blog posts. And that's kind of my always closing statement is that people have to be courageous and they have to be willing to fail and they have to be willing to put out and they have to recognize that those things are easiest in the presence of somebody who's accepting. And you should find out pretty quickly if paying for help is valuable. Because if it is valuable and you're not doing it, you're missing something.
Yeah.
Hopefully, that will advance everybody and let them be even greater failures and less hurtful and wasting of less time.
Yeah. You know what? Honestly, I think what I'm going to do is to make this easier for anybody that's listening out there. I will put the link for your website in the description box below, and then regarding the schedule for the 15-minute call, do you have a link or is it on your website directly?
It is both. It's just my website /schedule 15 without any spaces. Schedule 15. So it's mindstrengthbalance.com /schedule 15.
Okay.
Because it's a 15-minute thing.
Perfect.
So yeah, I'd love to talk to people, and I'm especially interested in creatives, and yeah, people who are, I was going to say troubled, but I should say struggling to produce. I'm a what do you call it? I'm a high performance person myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was always over booked my time and resources.
I like to, I mean, I call it busy, just keeping yourself busy constantly. And I think the importance of conversations like this, very much so, I've structured my podcast around me kind of putting myself in the perspective of being the audience. We're in the sense of, I'm an artist, I'm a creative person. I like to, like I said earlier, I like to be able to see the different perspectives, especially when it comes to how other artists think, or for example, in your case as a therapist, how you found your view in regards to therapy and the direction that works for you. I think that is in itself awareness to allow people to see different ways instead of being fixed into this mindset of oh, there's only one way of doing things. There's only one solution for problems. I don't think that's real.
Well, of course it's not real. As long as they're different problems, different solutions.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot that could be talked about with regard to different kinds of problems. I mean, the typical different problems are technical, how to be creative in your field, relationship, obviously, family, historical legacy, sometimes with parents, sometimes with kids. What you might call mental illness, which is a difficult category. Some people accept it, and I say accept it if it's helpful. You get insurance money or something. You get money for it, and it comes with a stigma. But if you can't avoid the stigma because everyone thinks you're nuts anyhow, might as well profit from it. And then there are other, things like attention deficit and difficulties in focus and problems with sleep and problems with health, physical health. I don't think any of this is cut and dry. You might say there are different approaches to these different problems, but I tend to mix it all together. If you have a physical problem, let's talk about its mental aspects.
Yeah.
If you have a mental problem, let's talk about its physical aspects. Because what are you missing? What are you overlooking? What strengths might be there?
Right.
It gets exhausting.
It does. It really. But you know what? Honestly, I really appreciate you taking the time, talking with me, and going over all of these ideas, especially when it comes to creativity and really understanding, like we were saying, what it is to be courageous, and taking those different ideas and mixing them around. But yeah, thank you.
Sure. Hopefully it's helpful.
And yeah. Well, like I said, if anybody wants to check out. The links and everything will be in the description box below. If you want to check out more of the podcast, you can find us at Awesome Pod. So, with that,